Is there any point reporting a crime these days? What are the chances of our overworked police turning out? Welcome to Politics West. Morning all. The police aren't investigating minor crimes and the public has rumbled them. That's according to their own watchdog. But is that really fair? On Politics West today, we're out on a raid in Wiltshire as the government vows to clamp down on drugs gangs.
Operations like the raid here today take months in the planning, but with dozens of drug supply chains operating in Swindon, police know they can't arrest their way out of this problem.
And access to justice, the Gloucester court that's a no-go zone for wheelchair users.
The only way was to be carried into the court because the door is so narrow that the wheelchair wouldn't even get through the door.
I'm delighted to say that on the sofa this week we have the Independent Police Commissioner for Gloucestershire, that's Martin Searle, and a man who hopes to be elected to that same post in Avon and Somerset, that's Mark Shelford. We'll be talking to them later. But first, let's talk to Thangam Debonair, who has been re-elected as Labour MP for Bristol West back in December. Seems a long time ago now, but a chance to catch up at last.
It's nice to see you.
First of all, the government reshuffle this week. What do you make of that?
Well, I thought it was really interesting that what was supposed to be a straightforward reshuffle turned into something that looks a bit like a mess. And also that anybody who thought that they were taking back control when we left the European Union and bringing power back to elected representatives in Westminster, well, essentially what we've got is someone completely unelected in Dominic Cummings who seems to be pulling all the strings. And we've now got the fiasco of a Chancellor of the Exchequer just weeks before the budget who's resigned because he's been told by Dominic Cummings, not elected by anybody, that he can't have the advisers that he wants.
What would you do, though, if there were unelected advisers advising your party leader?
There are unelected advisers advising all sorts of people, but in the end it has to be the elected politicians who take the decisions. And the elected politician yesterday did, and that was Sajid Javid. But it was not Boris Johnson who seemed to be pulling the strings there. It does seem rather as though it's Dominic Cummings.
Let's discuss Labour now and take you back to a cold December day on College Green in Bristol when you were the warm-up act for Jeremy Corbyn. Remember this?
I do.
And we need you to get out there again over the next 3 days and campaign to keep the seats we've got and take some more off the Tories.
Well, it was quite a performance.
Yeah.
You have to practice to get that much venom into the word the Tories.
Wanting a Labour government isn't something I have to practice. It just comes naturally when I wake up in the morning. There it is. Still want a Labour government.
Do you feel some guilt then that because you backed a man, as we saw there, who wasn't deemed suitable by the electorate, that you can't help the people that you say you want to help because you're not in government? There's nothing you can do.
I feel absolutely terrible that I can't help the people that I want to help because we're not in government. And I don't feel guilty. I just feel responsible for rebuilding the party and making sure that we win the next general election. We just get up and we carry on and we work harder and we regroup and we elect a new leader, which we're doing at the moment. And what I was doing that day, as every single day as a politician, is trying to get a Labour government, and I'll never stop trying to do that.
But it seems from the polling results that we've been looking at in some detail that in Bristol at least, you've lost the working class vote. They've turned against you. You've got the middle classes, you've got the professionals in some senses, NHS workers and university workers and all that. But the people at the checkout and the people driving your bus, they've gone Tory.
That's not what I found in Bristol West, I've got to say.
In Bristol South, there was a 10-point swing against Labour.
And I think that we've got some really challenging results across the whole of the country, actually. I mean, there's no denying it. It was an absolutely catastrophic result for my party. And I'm devastated about it. And I think an awful lot of people are going to suffer because of this decision, but it is a democratic vote. That's what happened. We've now got to regroup and we've got to make sure that we're listening to all those people who didn't vote Labour in December. Really, really listening to them. And not just in Bristol, but across the south, across the north, across Scotland and Wales, everywhere.
OK, thank you very much indeed. We've got lots more to talk to you about, so go and take your place on the sofa if you wouldn't mind, because we'll be joining you again later on. Now, one of the Prime Minister's first pledges after winning the election was to shut down the County Lines drugs gangs. He said they were killing young kids. Now, Dan O'Brien has been looking into this and he joins me now. Dan, I don't actually know what that term means.
It is very simply drug trafficking from big cities into rural areas. But the difference from the drug dealing we've seen in years gone by is this time it's really well organised.
And why the name?
Well, county lines refers to the counties which are far less used to having to deal with big organised crime. And the lines refers actually to the phone lines, the mobile phone lines that are used to coordinate it all. It's become such a widespread problem that it's become a real political issue now.
I really didn't know that. So the toughies from London and other places are coming down to what they see as the soft areas like Somerset, Gloucestershire and Wiltshire. Is that right?
Exactly right. That's exactly the attitude that they have. And in the past few weeks and months, our police forces in our region have been really trying to go on the offensive to tackle this. We know these gangs have been operating in Trowbridge, in Chippenham, in Taunton, in Gloucester, among others, but particularly in Swindon, mainly because it's so easy to get to from London, where I joined Wiltshire Police as they try to tackle the problem. Why knock when you could use one of these? Wiltshire Police targeting local parts of the drug supply chains known as county lines, a business model which sees gangs in big cities branching out to smaller towns like Swindon.
There's always been drug dealing, and we know crack and heroin are dealt regularly, but actually the way that the young kids are now used for it, the 14, 15, 16-year-olds that are brought into it under false pretenses of glamorisation of gang culture, and it's cool and it's trendy, and what actually they don't see is the danger behind it, the weapons that can be used against them, they're living in squalor, the actual debt bondage they get put into when people deliberately rob them of their drugs, they make them sell it for nothing. And again, it's just that cynical exploitation of young children. You promise them one thing and take something else from them entirely, and that we see more and more and more.
These raids have seen tens of thousands of pounds of crack and heroin seized, and dealers in all corners of Swindon taken into custody. Operations like the raid here today take months in the planning, but with dozens of drug supply chains operating in Swindon, police know they can't arrest their way out of this problem. They need some extra help.
15 minutes, yeah?
Across town, another rude awakening. In this house alone, they found £20,000 worth of Class A drugs. When it comes to county lines, police are realising the more they look, the more they find.
I think we're seeing across the country a massive explosion of the county line groups. I think it's an epidemic that's facing this country. We know we work closely with the National Crime Agency, who have their County Lines Coordination Centre. We hear the Home Secretary talk vividly about having to tackle this head on with our partners and to be on the front foot around enforcement.
The Chief's right. We have heard the Home Secretary promise more government help to tackle this, and she's not the only one.
I want to see the county lines drugs gangs wound up, rolled up. They are reducing the quality of life of people across our country. They're killing young kids. I want to see that thing totally wound up.
But Wiltshire Police have long warned about these problems. They've already enlisted schools and social services to help. So what is the government actually going to change? The local MP in South Swindon also happens to be the Justice Secretary.
What the Prime Minister is showing is a real sense of leadership and focus. And without going into the technical details of it, that inevitably means greater coordination and a sense of political will from him, from me, and from the Home Secretary. And we will work in lockstep to make sure that everything we can do, both at a national and a local level, is really targeted to protecting young people, recognising them as victims themselves, and dealing with the perpetrators, those who control and organise county lines in our country.
Swindon is far from alone in struggling with county lines drug gangs, but thanks to months of undercover work and the odd chainsaw, at least some of them have now been stopped.
That was a brilliant, insightful report. Thanks, Dan, for that. Now, police and crime commissioners are the elected bosses of local forces responsible for appointing chief constables and setting priorities for local policing. Martin Searle does that job in Gloucestershire, and Mark Shelford is here. He's standing for election as police and crime commissioner for Avon and Somerset in the May elections, which will be here before we know it, and Thangham is here as well. First of all, are we winning the battle? What's it like in Gloucestershire?
No, we're not winning the battle. That's absolutely clear. What you're seeing there is the symptoms, the police dealing with the symptoms of a problem they can't control. That's the outcome of a situation we have. The demand for cocaine across the southwest is sky high, and there are organised groups. These gangs are also as part of the chain. They're not the real problem. They're a massive problem. But the reality is this is driven by money, by gangs who want money in a ruthless trade, totally unregulated, where life is cheap, where people are expendable, and it's all about cash. So the police can keep knocking these people down, and they do a very good job in Wiltshire, Gloucestershire, I guess Avon and Somerset too. They keep coming, and until people cut the snake at the head off, or head of the snake, I think, we won't fix this one.
Mark, what's your solution?
Mine is concentrating on protecting children and young people, and that is about prevention and treatment. And prevention is, first of all, education, to stop the demand in the first place. Secondly, to intercept these gangs has been seen, and that's their lines of communication, both logistic and communication systems.
Have the police got the resources to do that?
They've been given more, and you'll be pleased to know that the government has given £20 million more to work on this, particularly on organised crime and anti-drugs.
Is there a case for thinking some of the people caught up in this are actually victims? They get arrested, but they're actually being manipulated by forces outside of their control.
Absolutely, and I do hope that all police and crime commissioners across the country are really clear about the difference between some of the victims who commit criminal acts in the course of being coerced, trafficked, abused, exploited, and those who are the real problem here. But I also want us to look at what the structure is. I mean, we've heard mention of the unregulated nature of this drugs trade, and that's partly because it is the legal structure we've got. Everything about the drugs trade is predicated on the fact that it is an illegal drugs trade, which means that criminals benefit from it being illegal because they are prepared to exploit young people who are vulnerable.
So what's your answer then, to make it legal?
I think we at least have to look at the fact that keeping it illegal isn't working. Everything that's being sold in county lines is illegal, but it's still being sold, and it's being sold in an unregulated way.
What do you think?
But we also need the police officers.
Dame Carol Black is doing a review on behalf of the government of all areas of addiction. And I will look at what she says as far as that. But at the moment, I'm absolutely against legalisation of any type of drug.
It's not working, though, is it?
This is about the police. The police are knocking these people at the far end. It's like the doctors in the hospital trying to sort out the coronavirus, where the real problem is far further down the line. I'm not going to go into regulation, but we have a country where you can buy a SIM card for just a couple of quid, send 20,000 unregulated, completely unregulated. The people behind these gangs do not care about the people who are doing it. They will take them out. If they die, they don't care.
So should it be legal? Should you
this is
relax
for the
the controls
politicians.
on...
I'm a police and crime commissioner.
But you're also a politician.
You're elected.
You need a grown-up approach, but let's also look at the people who are using this cocaine. These aren't the kids in the streets. These are well-educated people, probably some in government, historically, for sure. And while that demand is there will be a market so regulated in some way.
All right, we saw that raid, and you can imagine the planning that went into doing that. That means that police resources are being used a lot to deal with drugs. And the police watchdog said only this month that they're not investigating more minor offences. Is that the case?
It's absolutely the case at the moment. And on the doorstep, people are telling me that they're very frustrated about the fact that they're not getting the service that they feel they deserve.
Do they blame your government for cutting it?
No, they don't. And the police themselves are under enormous pressure. And part of it is structural, that we have structurally lost a lot of our detectives and our investigation branch. And we need to look at that carefully.
I mean, that same report also criticised police services for being slow to point out the effect of the government cuts. Now, you're an independent, so I guess that you can do that. But if you're elected as a Conservative, would you find that very difficult to say, look, we're not getting the cash?
Well, I'm extremely pleased to say that we've been given a £22.3 million boost to the budget this year, out of a total of just over 300 million. So the money is coming, and we're getting lots of new policemen.
I mean, it's just a bit rich. I mean, we've had cuts of 20,000 frontline police officers, 7,000 police and community support officers, and numerous back office civilian officers, staff who are really necessary if we're going to fight crime. Of course, people feel angry that their crimes aren't being cleared up or even investigated. Of course they do. But it's just disingenuous to pretend that that's got nothing to do with the cuts of the last 10 years. Of course it has.
You really can't be serious to say that losing that quantity of officers and staff, 360, no increase in government for 10 years, there's no impact. It's had a massive impact. Do they blame the government? I don't really care.
They do when I talk to them.
I'm being independent. The reality is there's not enough police to do the job the public expects.
Just be honest then, what's the chances of a burglar getting away with it in your area?
Every burglar in Gloucester will be attended now. That was something I put in place only a few weeks ago.
What are the chances of them being caught?
Every burglar will probably get caught, but not for every burglary. The reality is I make every crime matters the mantra of Gloucestershire Police, because every victim matters.
OK, thank you very much. Now, still to come. After Bristol Airport's plans to expand are turned down, I'll be asking the airport boss, what next? But first, in only 10 years, more than half of our magistrates' courts have closed down. The government argues many were underused or in a very bad way. It means people are having to travel a long way to have their day in court, and when they get there, some struggle to get inside the building. Here's Robin.
Historic, Grade 2 listed, and beautiful. But inside, this Crown Court's in a bad way.
Critics say Gloucester Crown Court here is no longer fit for purpose. Built in 1816, they say it feels more like a museum. The roof leaks, there are inkwells for your quills on the press bench, and as for disabled access, well, there isn't any.
Law student Devi Williams found that to her cost. She tried to visit the courtroom on several occasions. She'd wanted to witness a trial for her degree, but getting her wheelchair inside proved impossible.
The only way was to be carried into the court because the door is so narrow that the wheelchair wouldn't even get through the door. And then once you're put on a bench, which is a very narrow bench, you have to sit for 4 hours. You're not allowed to move, which again is completely impractical, undignified, just doesn't work. You know, we're supposed to have access to justice in this country, and it's denying people like me access to justice, which is wrong.
In a statement, the Courts and Tribunal Service apologised unreservedly and said,
Gloucester Crown Court is Grade 2 listed, and we are not able to modify the building to make it fully accessible for people with disabilities. Where access is not possible, we make alternative arrangements for individuals to attend other nearby courts.
But attending nearby courts is becoming increasingly difficult.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Robin. Nice to see you.
What did you make of the report, then?
Makes very interesting reading.
A new report by the Gloucestershire Police Commissioner's Office reveals just how many courts have closed down recently. Just listen to the list for Gloucestershire alone.
Colford, Cirencester, Stroud and Gloucester. That's within the last 10 years.
The county now finds itself at the bottom of the table for access to local justice, a fact that troubles those who've served for many years as magistrates.
If you're going to leave the system at its minimum, the facilities that you're leaving have to be good enough to be able to sustain the workload, to be able to be accessible. The big fear, I think, is the fact that, if were Cheltenham as a criminal magistrate court to close, it would mean the only options really would be Bristol. And that opens a whole different scenario, because travelling from the wilder parts of Gloucestershire to get to Bristol for hearings is just not doable.
But the government argues the programme of court closures will help enhance those courtrooms that remain.
Those closed are either underused, dilapidated, or too close to another court, while every penny of the 129 million raised from sales is being reinvested into modernising our court system.
The local police commissioner reckons he has one solution on land he owns next to Police HQ.
is where I'd like to see a new court go. The one we have in Gloucester is built by Napoleonic prisoners of war. I think the county is overdue for a new court, and the location is perfect.
But big plans cost money, and many working in the legal system think of theirs as the Cinderella service, so often overlooked. Whether the sunny uplands that are the end to austerity stretch to the court system is a matter for the new Chancellor, and a budget just weeks away.
Well, I've got very fond memories of Gloucester Court. I met my wife there. We weren't defendants, we were reporters, I have to say, and it was during a long delay in cases. But brings me round to the point, I guess, that some of these courts are inefficient. Do we need as many?
Well, we've only got one left now in Gloucestershire, one Crown Court and one Magistrates Court. They are in a shocking condition. If you read the report, the former resident judge describes it as demeaning, shocking. It's a really serious issue. I've been campaigning on this now for probably 5 or 6 years.
But it's outside your brief. What's it got to do with you?
It's because we say it's about victims. It's about the justice system. It needs to work together. I have the responsibility for the totality of the witness care in the county. I don't have all the responsibility. But it's no good arresting people or asking people to go to court as a witness, that when they get to the court, they have an absolutely awful experience. So, yes, maybe I am doing things that others should be doing. I've written to pretty much all the justice ministers. They come and go like buses. Thankfully, Robert Buckland's going to be here for a while, I would think. They write back to me and say, everything's fine. And I say, look, you're the only person who thinks that, so come and look at it. And they haven't actually come yet. They said they will, but they won't. It is a national disgrace what's going on in Gloucestershire.
It's hard to defend, isn't it, from the government, the fact that you can't get into the court building if you're disabled?
The government has taken note of a lot of issues with the court system at the moment, and they have promised a royal commission into the judicial system, which should take a year. And within Avon and Somerset, for example, we have 5 court centres in order to try and minimise the amount of travel time between where somebody lives and where somebody may go to court. And they're also trying to change the regime of court to minimise the amount of court time.
Thang, what would Labour do? Let's bring in Thang.
I think that, if a series of Tory-led governments have cut and cut and cut away at different bits of the criminal justice system, they've cut police funding, they've cut funding for courts, they've made it difficult for people to travel to a court in many areas of the country. And I think having a royal commission isn't really the answer to this. I think quite a lot of us could just tell the government and have what the problem is. And I think usually when a government announces a royal commission, it's a way of saying we'll get round to this later on, maybe or maybe not.
Is there ever any justification for closing a courthouse, do you think?
Oh, there may well be, but I think the justification has been missed in many of these cases because it means that witnesses can't get to court. But also, if a disabled person can't get into a court, that means that justice is denied to disabled people. That cannot be right. So if we are closing down courts, we're clearly closing the wrong ones.
Labour closed, just pointing out, Labour closed 115 magistrates' courts between 1997 and 2004.
Yes, so as I said, sometimes courts do need to be closed down. I'm not defending all of the cuts, but I'm also saying that they need to be done properly.
Do you buy that the money saved will be reinvested in the court system?
Well, it's not getting reinvested in Gloucestershire. They keep closing them. I have an oven-ready solution for them. Somebody famous said, they're oven-ready, pop it in the microwave, and we can actually build a court.
We're getting flashbacks here. We're getting flashbacks.
Of a Napoleonic court, we deserve a new one. The one we have doesn't comply with the law. A court that doesn't comply with the Equalities Act. How can that be right?
Okay.
We're not asking for much. We're asking to be treated properly.
Thank you very much indeed. And those commissioner elections are still a while off. We'll be hearing from more candidates as we get closer to them, so don't panic. Everyone will have their say. Well, one of the biggest stories of the week came on Monday night. Climate campaigners celebrated after plans to expand Bristol Airport were rejected. The airport had wanted to grow from 10 to 12 million passengers a year with a new transport hub and bigger car park. Well, I caught up with the airport's chief executive, Dave Lees. On a scale of 1 to 10, how big a blow is this for Bristol Airport?
It's a pretty big blow, bearing in mind we had a really strong case. I think it's a 6 or a 7, mainly because we've got a really good strong case, which was endorsed by, the officers' recommendation, a 235-page document, which was giving endorsement for approval.
Wasn't it naive of you to think you could expand this airport at a time of a climate emergency?
I mean, climate change is a really important thing. That's the first thing to highlight. Nobody would deny that. I'm sure if you spoke to anybody here in the terminal today, they would agree. But at the same time, it doesn't mean to say that we have to stop everything in life. We have to find a way forward, whether that be travel, whether that be eating, whether that be clothing ourselves. And travel, air travel is an essential part of our lives.
So are you going to appeal against the council's decision?
I think we're going to wait, first of all, to see exactly what the grounds of the rejection were. Obviously, it was a very heated and long conversation the other evening, and we'll have to wait until the final sign-off, probably in the next month.
You got 10 million, you wanted to go to 12. When would it ever stop if they approve this?
Well, I think one of the aspects is, this was just looking at a 2 million passenger increase. It's a measured response to, an increase in air travel. It never ceases to amaze me that as well as the 9 million people who are flying through the airport this year, there's another 8 million people, near the size of London, who travel from this region to the London airports to get on a plane.
Even though you're a modern airport, you haven't spent any money on walkways, you haven't got many escalators, people still have to queue on the tarmac in the rain.
But that's because people, want to have relatively low-cost travel. We respond to our airlines. People want to get on board an aircraft quickly. They don't want to have all the complications associated with getting on board an aircraft.
All the profits from this place go abroad because you're owned by a Canadian pension company. So what's the evidence that this place benefits Bristol or indeed North Somerset?
The 4,000 people who work here is a good starting point, the rates we pay, the taxes we pay, but more importantly, the role which we play in part of the wider economy. Over 20,000 people are indirectly employed. Go and speak to the hoteliers in the region, go and speak to the businesses in the region who use this airport on a regular basis.
But the profits go abroad.
The profits go abroad because they're feeding into a pension company. We live in a worldwide society. Pension companies, for people in this country, yield their results from companies abroad as well. That's the nature of investment.
Dave Lee's there. So did the council get it right? Mark, you used to be in charge of transport issues for Baines, I understand. How would you have voted on this one?
On the face of it, it's a good decision, but I'm concerned about the effects of the carbon that will be distributed across the rest of the country for people travelling, say, to Heathrow or Gatwick. Have they made the decision based on the total sum? And that I'm concerned about, and I'm also concerned about the connections from Bristol to the airport, which need to be improved.
Sangam, you were against this.
Yes, and that's because climate change is a global emergency, but it needs national leadership from the government. The government is so far failing to take any decent role on this. It hasn't even managed to book a room for the climate change conference that we're supposed to be having later this year, and it's just appointed a government minister to take responsibility who's got a whole other government department to run, and it needs national leadership.
A lot of working families enjoy a couple of weeks in Spain. It's a very special time.
It is.
Can you understand them thinking, well, I want to use my local airport?
I completely can, which is why we need a national strategy, because otherwise those same flights are going to take place, but they're just going to go to Cardiff or Birmingham or London. And if we're going to tackle climate emergency, it means working with all elements of not just the airline industry, but the travel industry, with every aspect of how we live our lives, which has an impact on carbon emissions.
It will probably go to appeal. Which way do you think the government will jump? Bear in mind, they've bailed out Flybe, which flies from Bristol.
They did, and in my view, they shouldn't have done. But I also think that the government's got to show leadership on how we're tackling this climate emergency. It can't just be left to individual council. I salute the campaigners, but it can't be just left to individual councils.
Thank you very much indeed. That's all we have time for this week. My thanks to my guests. We're off out into Storm Dennis. We'll be back in a fortnight because we are on holiday next week. Woo! Since we're all being encouraged to staycation, we thought we'd finish with a reminder of the glory days of the great British holiday from all of us here. Have a nice week and we'll see you in a fortnight.